samadhi. And so she wrote this Jane Hirschfield, longtime poet, wonderful scholar, wonderful poet, but also a lifelong Zen practitioner. In fact, by coincidence, she and I practiced together in a Zen monastery. So she wrote an essay called Poetry and Samadhi. She actually called it concentration, but samadhi is a better word because it's more descriptive than what we think concentration is. By concentration, I mean a particular state of awareness, penetrating, unified, focused, yet permeable and open. This quality of consciousness, though not easily put into words, is instantly recognizable. Aldous Huxley described it as the moment the doors of perception opened. James Joyce called it epiphany. The experience of concentration may be physical, a deep sense of accord between yourself and everything. It can come as the harvest of long looking, as Wordsworth said, too deep for tears. Concentration can be placed in things, like the undimmed light of Vermeer's painting, or the small marble figure of a lyre player in prehistoric Greece. It can be put into music, into words, ideas. The wholeheartedness of concentration is where the world and the self begin to cohere. So when I was asked for a title for my part of this conversation or talk, I used the phrase chitta bhavana, cultivation of consciousness. Because the process of waking up is, to a very major extent, defined by how we use the operative tool that we have, which is consciousness. You know? And so how we use it, how we learn to be skillful with it, is a direct factor, and I would argue the most significant factor in how the world is experienced. So if we want to look at how to be happy and less suffering, we need to look at consciousness and how we're cultivating it. Okay? I'll stop there.
You can hear me. Okay. I would still finish a little bit about scientific approach, if you don't mind. Just, it's interesting how it's interesting contradiction. Science is more loud, less subtle, and of course much more superficial probably, but it tries to be more concrete. So of course I will just skip many of the slides. I would just like you to show two slides where we, those that are trying to be scientific, are trying to ask ourselves what is to be done. Oh, but before that, that's a slide where I stopped. You see where it says natural attitude is going to bracketing. Bracketing is a phenomenological term for what Westerners try to do and is similar to cultivating the consciousness. Actually, Husserl, in French, it's époché, or bracketing. He said we should bracket our presuppositions of how things are if we want to see the experience. And that's actually the main methodological tool also in scientific attempt of consciousness research. And the other problem is actually that in science, we don't want to be involved. We don't want to actually change ourselves. We would just like to see as it is, things as they are. And it's a big problem within this realm. And these are the questions one has to ask if he wants to research experience in any way.
So you see there are two groups.
One is, what is the research perspective and who is the researcher? So the notion of me, researcher, checking the subject is very blurred here. And why is it blurred? Because you can, as we heard, it's really hard to get a good experiential report from somebody that is not interested. So I can ask somebody about the experience, but if that one is not really engaged, is not really into it, is not really interested, you will just get a little bit of superficial, vague statements. So this is the first pair of questions one should ask. And the other, and I'll tell a little bit more about that. The other set is, what is the aim of the research? Or on the other, with the other words, what kind of knowledge do we want to gather? As you see, obviously, Buddhists, they gathered a lot of propositional knowledge. They did some classifying and so on, obviously, a lot of classifying. But I would say, not being expert in this, but I would say that actually everything in Buddhist cosmology, everything leads to personal experience, not to some propositional set of things. But here in science, we want something hard. We want something that can be passed, that can be checked, and so on. So these are two sets that are problematic. So let's go back. I draw a simple graph that we actually devised. This is not my invention. It was devised at that last Berkeley conference on first-person research 2 weeks ago. On one axis, there is, you see, first, second, third-person perspective. What does that mean? That means third-person perspective is if I want to see what your experience is about, what it's like to be you, or how you experience this sitting here, for example. Let's not go into this. So let's go to first. First-person perspective is how I experience things. And second-person perspective, this is a new, actually, stuff that's developing. It's a dialogical praxis. It's where we are both researchers. We are co-researchers. So these are three ways to approach this from the, let's call it, agency of experience. And here, we could say this is a scientific part and this is the personal, subjective research. And the question, so you see, for example, you can observe from the third-person perspective. So I want to research how, let's say, bulimic women experience the world, which was the research, very famous research by Russ Hulbert, the guy I showed you before. So he was doing something. He was not checking his research. He was checking others' research. So it was third person, and the kind of knowledge he got was a classified data, phenomenal data, reports. So it's somewhere here. That would be here. It clearly goes towards a scientific milieu. But if, for example, we are talking, let's say I have a person and we are both interested in how it's like to be, in experience, that would be a second-person research. And this is now the question. Then we have to ask ourselves, what kind of knowledge do we want to gather? If that is a propositional knowledge, we want to classify our experience, then we'll lose a lot. And that's, I think, was the point of what you were saying. We'll lose a lot, but we'll have something to show, something to publish, perhaps, even if we are really rigorous. But if we really want to go into it and experience as it is, then we'll probably stay somewhere here. And the huge question of first-person research or phenomenological research is, can this gap be breached? And that's actually all I wanted to say in theoretical reading. That's just a little graph of what kinds of experience are researched. It's interesting, you know, in neuroscience, lots is learned from pathologists. I, for example, am working with Tourette syndrome patients. Ross Hulbert was working with bulimic women and so on. Lots can be learned. Many of researchers in first-person realm would call themselves anthropologists of everyday experience, which I find a really good name of this. This is that classifying part. And we have another dimension here that is not known in neuroscience or medicine, which is alternatives. As you probably know, lots of studies are done recently with meditators. Serious studies. John Hopkins has a huge department where they do this or in Arizona, for example, Hamarov, whatever. They do a lot of stuff with meditators, not with pathologists, but with somebody that have some alternative ways of experiencing. So this is an interesting part here. We have new horizon in first-person research. And of course, there is self-inquiry, which is to the left side of that graph, so I'm not going into it. Now, if you're still up to it, I would just tell a little bit, like a couple of minutes, about how different, I would just present two, actually, different approaches. I have some videos, but I don't think they will work because I forgot to, sound is essential here, so probably we'll just skip them. I would just tell you. So there are two main approaches. One is sampling, and the other is hermeneutic approach. The sampling was invented by Russell Hulbert 30 years ago. He actually devised boxes a little bit like this that go and beep randomly like 6-7 times a day at random times. You would just carry the box, and on the other pocket you would carry a notebook. And it beeps, and you have to write down or somehow anchor the experience just before the moment of the beep. And just before the beep sounds, just before the moment of the beep. Just one moment before the beep. And it's called descriptive experience sampling. It's a 30-year-old method, and a lot is used, although they are rarely quoting him who invented it. For example, if you know the realm of positive psychology, Csikszentmihalyi, probably wrongly pronounced. It's quite a big stuff. You can go to TED Talks, a lot of stuff here about that. They also use the same method, although Csikszentmihalyi is much richer than Russell Hulbert, and they have the palms, palm little devices, because there is this Hungarian connection with Gallup, who finances his research. So that's how it goes. I have some videos how he does it, but we'll skip that. He will publish them shortly online, so you'll be able to see that. He would go and sample the day. He also, by the way, is physicist by his first education. And this is very physics method, random sampling. If you can't do otherwise, you do the random sampling of the day. And it's really interesting because he says that 30% of his subjects report that he gets to know them after 3 days of random sampling. He gets to know them better than anybody, as close as possible to themselves after just this. So he would just ask, he would say, I'm asking open beginning questions, also open-ended, but also open beginning. So he wouldn't hint. Some people say, I wasn't experiencing anything. And he would say, okay, let's go on. he is not trying to imply anything. He is practicing the bracketing stuff. So that's how the sampling method works. And then he would do the sort of classifications of different experiential categories, like, for example, direct perception or unsymbolized thinking, and so on. Not just one paper of him appeared about unsymbolized thinking, which is actually interesting. Thinking without seeing words or without having pictures and so on, but just knowing what I'm thinking about. And he did a lot of study with bulimic women, as I mentioned. And the interesting part there is that he discovered that what is common with all bulimic women is they have a multiple perception. They process up to 10 or even more streams of thought at the same time. Quite interesting stuff. And some other, he's doing now the big research with teenagers, also really interesting new perspective on emotions. Then there is hermeneutic approach. I decided to quote myself, although Claire Petit-Magil, the student of Varela, is of course the beginner of that. I'm working with Tourette patients right now, and I'm not going to go into it. I just the approach is different. At Ross's the sampling method, the approach is you don't want to mess with what people have to tell. So you try to get out things as undisturbed as possible, as little a retrospection as possible. If the subject would start going like, oh yeah, I don't know, perhaps it was like that, he would say, okay, let's go on. You know, he wouldn't try to make them remember or something, because his idea is that remembering alters things. But here we are dealing with, in hermeneutic approach, we are dealing with phenomena that is reoccurring. For example, we are studying decision making, which is something that is reoccurring, and so we can reach iteration, which is the essential part, and that's why you can't just ask people. We call this armchair perspective or automatic introspection. You know, you have to actually train people to be observant about the consciousness. This is the issue that probably is in common to Buddhist approach. So one would actually keep returning to the same phenomenon, although different occurrences of this phenomenon. And the interesting stuff we were checking the decision-making stuff with Tourette patient. Actually, I got to this when I was once at the neurological conference, epileptologists, and they were watching all this video, you know, of the seizures, and somehow they got into the discussion, what is this guy actually experiencing? And the doctor of that guy had no idea. And then and I said, well, but this is so interesting. If you see expressions and everything, there must be such a rich world. And somehow that way I got into the research of Tourette syndrome patients, which are also, they have such a rich world. And the interesting part is that this is the extreme, but we think that from this extreme we can say something about the generality of human decision making. I'm not going to go into. I'm very tempted, but I'm not going to go. So there is also a third big stream, which is neurophenomenology. That was suggested by Varela. They would say we should go parallelly with neurology. So we should see the same phenomena, and not just from neurological point of view, but also from experiential point of view. And also in epilepsy, there were some studies done. Let's not go there. These are some solid guidelines that are some things that are clear so far. As you see, this is a young and fragile field, but some things that are clear. And I think those three are absolutely are parallel or very similar to what Buddhists obviously found out a long time ago. And I'm not going to, I told most of them, with bracketing and training, and there is no such thing as subject in this sort of research. Everybody, those that will be called subjects in psychology are co-researchers here. If they are not, I mean, it's not just a name. If they are not prepared to research their own experience, study is not valid. And now, just conclusion, I see this is one of the possible outcomes of this field of first-person research. So we all are a little bit skeptical that that will grow into a true science. Although on the other side, neglecting experience for so long is also very problematic, and it's obvious that it comes up from time to time within the realm of science as well. So there is one scenario that is possible when this field will grow. The middle one is not so important, but it could help understand problems in a way that Paul mentioned a little bit. So by observing, it could just the techniques of observation could help people solve some things. In psychotherapy, mindfulness techniques are really huge right now. But I'm not going to go into that. I'm more interested in first and third point here. One is that science of third person reports about experience really develops, and it probably will eventually, because otherwise neuroscience won't be able to grow. But this will, of course, it will deal with reified states of experience and so on with characteristics, so it will lose a lot. But there might be such thing as a culture of research and co-research that might grow eventually, which would grow out of this field probably. So the culture which is not connected to any, not directly connected to any tradition, any spiritual tradition, but just a community of people that are really interested in their own experience, and the community that is open-ended, where you don't have to validate the results, but where you can talk about a path going there. So this is a little bit, a little stream that is showing at some fringes of this experience research. And there I again agree with you that you said that you can somehow share the path, but the experiences are private and are not communicable. So let me finish there. And I would ask for your questions. Otherwise, I have a lot of questions for Paul.
You know, it's hard to know because it was an oral tradition for at least 300 years. So then there's